Now, after the war, again, trying to understand Gerhardt's mindset, after that kind of rhetoric was poured over the German people for a decade, and after the war was over, an American newspaper man, he was a reporter in Chicago, Milton Mayer, went over to Germany and befriended and extensively, I mean, he spent several months over there, extensively interviewed 10 German average people. There was a baker, there was a college professor, there was a car mechanic. I don't remember all the other professions. It's been a few years since I read his book all the way through, who went along with the Nazis and said, how could you have done it? Didn't you see the railroad cars? Didn't you notice the cities being emptied of Jews? How could you have gone along with it? And one of them, a college professor, said to him, and this is in Milton Mayer's book, They Thought They Were Free is the title of his book. He's talking to Mayer. This is a transcript of the interview. And he says, what happened here was the gradual habituation of the people, little by little, to being governed by surprise, to receiving decisions deliberated in secret, to believing that the situation was so complicated and dangerous that the government had to act on information which the people could not understand, or so dangerous that even if the people could understand it, it could not be released because of national security. This separation of government from people, this widening of the gap, took place so gradually and so insensibly, each step disguised, perhaps not even intentionally, as a temporary emergency measure or associated with true patriotic allegiance or with real social purposes. And all the crises and reforms, and real reforms too, so occupied the people that they did not see the slow motion underneath of the whole process of government growing remoter and remoter. To live in this process is absolutely to be able not to is absolutely not to be able to notice it. Please try to believe me. Unless one has a much greater degree of political awareness, acuity, than most of us have ever had the occasion to develop. Each step was so small, so inconsequential, so well explained, or on occasion regretted, that unless one were detached from the whole process from the beginning, unless one understood what the whole thing was in principle, what all these little measures that no patriotic German could resent must someday lead to, one no more saw it developing from day to day than a farmer in his field sees the corn growing, and one day it is over his head. This fellow continued, he said, Pastor Niemöller spoke for the thousands and thousands of men like me when he spoke too modestly of himself, and said that when the Nazis attacked the communists, he was a little uneasy, but after all, he was not a communist, and so he did nothing. And then they attacked the socialists, and he was a little uneasier, but still he was not a socialist, and he did nothing. And then the schools, the press, the Jews, and so on. And he was always uneasier, but still he did nothing. And then they attacked the church, and he was a churchman. And he did something, but then it was too late. You see, one doesn't see exactly how or where to move. Believe me, this is true. Each act, each occasion is worse than the last, but only a little worse. You wait for the next and the next. You wait for the one great shocking occasion, thinking that others, when such a shock comes, will join you in resisting somehow. You don't want to act or even talk alone. You don't want to go out of your way to make trouble. Why not? Well, you're not in the habit of doing it. And it's not just fear of standing alone that restrains you. It is also genuine uncertainty. Uncertainty is a very important factor, and instead of decreasing as time goes on, it grows. Outside in the streets, in the general community, everyone seems happy. One hears no protests, certainly sees none. You know, in France or Italy, there were slogans against the government painted on walls and fences. In Germany, outside the great cities, perhaps, there's not even this. In the university community, in my own community, you speak privately to your colleagues, some of whom certainly feel as you do, but what do they say? They say, it's not so bad. You're seeing things. You're an alarmist. And you are an alarmist. You're saying that this must lead to that. But you can't prove it. These are the beginnings, yes, but how do you know for sure when you don't know the end? And how do you know or even surmise the end? On the one hand, your enemies, the law, the regime, the party, they intimidate you. On the other, your colleagues poo-poo you as pessimistic or even neurotic. And that one great shocking occasion when tens or hundreds of thousands will join you never comes. That's the difficulty. If the last and worst act of the whole regime had come immediately after the first and the smallest, thousands, yes, millions would have been sufficiently shocked. If, let us say, the gassing of the Jews in 43 had come immediately after the German firm-only stickers on the windows of non-Jewish shops in 33. But, of course, this isn't the way it happens. In between come all the hundreds of little steps, some of them imperceptible, each of them preparing you not to be shocked by the next. Step C was not so much worse than step B, and if you didn't make a stand at step B, then why should you at step C, and so on to step D? And one day, too late, your principles, if you were ever sensible of them, all rush in upon you. The burden of self-deception has grown too heavy, and some minor incident, in my case, it was my little boy, hardly more than a baby, saying, "Jews, swine." It all collapses in at once, and you see everything has changed, and changed completely under your nose. The world you live in, your nation, your people, it's not the world you thought you were in at all. The forms are all there, all untouched, all reassuring, the houses, the shops, the jobs, the mealtimes, the visits, the concerts, the cinema, the holidays. But the spirit, which you never noticed because you made the lifelong mistake of identifying it with the forms, is changed. And now you live in a world of hate and fear. And the people who hate and fear do not even know it themselves. When everyone is transformed, no one is transformed. Now you live in a system which rules without responsibility even to God. And Meyer asked this man, this German, well, what could you have done? And he said, how is this to be avoided? Even among highly educated ordinary men. And without benefit of previous and recent history, his informant, the fellow he was speaking with, said, "Frankly, I do not know." He said, "I don't see even now how we could have stopped it. One must foresee the end clearly in order to stop the beginning." Maybe it's time to start talking about the ends and the beginnings.